Tonight, the fallout from the failed Tiwi gas court case as the Environmental Defender's Office comes under fire. Flooded and fed up, Queensland residents face another mammoth clean-up, some for the third time. Dreamtime in Darwin, the new push to play AFL's Indigenous Showcase in the top end. And long arm of the claw, police rescue a 3-year-old whose curiosity got the better of him. Good evening, Kyle Dowling with ABC News. Santos will not seek legal costs from Tiwi Islanders after a failed federal court bid to suspend the Barossa project over cultural heritage concerns. It comes as the Environmental Defender's Office faces backlash after it was found to have manipulated the instructions of their Indigenous clients in the case. The federal opposition says the national body should be stripped of funding, while the Northern Territory government is now reviewing its contract with the provider.
The Barossa project is back on track after costly delays from a failed legal challenge.
There's no secret that I don't think the balance is right, given that we were delayed for a year or so after we had our project approved.
While the federal court ordered the Tiwi Islands plaintiffs to pay Santos's legal bills, CEO Kevin Gallagher says the company will recoup their costs through other avenues.
That'll become evident in time. We're working through those processes.
The Tiwi elders' lawyers at the Environmental Defender's Office coming under nationwide scrutiny.
If a coalition government is elected at the next election, we will defund that body because it is a bunch of radical environmentalists.
I've already spoken to Kate Warden, the Environment Minister, to say we need to have a look at that contract. We fund them $100,000 a year.
It follows a federal court ruling that EDO lawyers engaged in a subtle form of coaching of Tiwi witnesses around the location of dreaming sites near Santos's Barossa gas pipeline. At risk, $8 million in federal funding for the EDO. But the Law Council says defunding the organisation would be a step in the wrong direction.
I think that would be a very unfortunate retrograde step based on a single instance where there may have been some adverse commentary in one particular case.
About 200,000 Australians access community legal services every year, and the EDO is just one of them.
If we weren't around, they would not be getting legal assistance. So in those circumstances, people don't get to enforce their rights. They often don't pursue their rights at all. They dip out of the process and they are fundamentally disadvantaged.
In a statement, the EDO said without their services, grandparents, young people, charities and community groups would be denied access to the legal system. The federal government did not say whether it would cut any of the EDO's funding, just that it takes the Mankara Santos judgment seriously. Samantha Dick, ABC News.
Piles of destroyed possessions are growing north of Brisbane as hundreds try to recover from a second flood in 2 years. The government is probing the state's preparedness and response to the disaster, but some are calling for a new buyback scheme so they can leave a nightmare behind.
The streets of Bray Park are a dumping ground for furniture. Lives reduced to piles of possessions that just keep growing as the clean-up from another flood continues.
Fix the problem, mate. The government and the council have got to get this right.
After every disaster, we do a review of what happened, of our response and of what's needed for recovery.
Days after Monday's flood, the damage bill is still rising.
Family, friends, random people from over the streets helping us, just dragging everything that belongs to us out in the front.
Reggie Matthews lost more than $100,000 after the tide swallowed his tools, car and home.
I didn't actually realise it was my roommate Justin. He thought we were getting broken into. He's rushed up, just said, Reggie, we're getting flooded.
I woke up to the fridge, flipping from the water and broke the glass window, but that's before I knew it was flooded. And I thought someone was breaking in, so I jumped up into a pile of water.
That water inundated 400 homes across Bray Park, including Blake Cohen's, who'd been thinking of moving since the 2022 floods.
Obviously now it's probably going to be a bit harder for us. It's like no one's going to want to buy a house that's been flooded twice in a few years.
Residents are calling on the state and federal governments to consider buying back repeatedly affected properties from owners, similar to what was done after 2022.
If the Queensland Government wishes to come to us with a new proposal, then we'd of course consider that.
It would definitely help us, follow our mission this year to get our own new place, like a dream home type thing.
Toby Jers-Lewis, ABC News.
On the 40th anniversary of Medicare, new government data shows bulk billing rates are on the rise. It follows last year's budget, which raised the incentive paid to GPs when they bulk bill children, pensioners and concession card holders. Doctors have welcomed the news, but say there's still a long way to go to make doctors' visits affordable for all.
Okay, so next week for the board report, we'll need...
Once Gemma Sims has paid rent and all of her family's costs, she doesn't have much left for visits to the doctor.
When I do access a GP, which I haven't for a very long time, it's really expensive.
She has a healthcare card, but she says she hasn't been able to find any clinics that bulk bill, and she's been prioritising her children's medical appointments.
I'm missing out. I haven't been to the GP in at least 3 years.
To help people like Gemma, in last year's budget, the government raised the incentive it pays to GPs to bulk bill. It says it's working. In the first 2 months, bulk billing rose 2.1 percentage points.
In November and December alone, just 2 months, there were 360,000 additional free visits to the doctor.
The Health Minister says some of the biggest increases in these appointments have been in regional areas and in Tasmania, where bulk billing rates have been low.
We need to have in mind continued access for the most vulnerable and disadvantaged people in our community.
Of course we want to see more increases into the future, but we've managed in one short year to stop the slide and to start to see a turnaround.
When Peter Dutton was Health Minister, the bulk billing rates were about 84%. Under Mark Butler, we're just over 77%.
GPs want further increases to Medicare rebates paid to primary care providers.
If you invest in general practice, we get the outcomes that are needed for our patients.
That would help people like Gemma Sims.
I've seen no difference, and it's certainly not made it any easier for me financially to access medical care at all.
That means universal healthcare remains out of her reach. Rachel Carbonell, ABC News.
Despite 13 interest rate hikes since May 2022, house prices are on track to continue rising across the country. Agents say the market is being propelled by renters and migrants wanting to buy their own homes and buyers trying to get in ahead of interest rate cuts expected later this year.
And $1,050,000 for the third final call.
In Australia's second biggest property market, buyers are holding their nerve.
All finished. Well, the bids here, ladies and gentlemen, formally pass the property into this lady here. She'll have first exclusive rights at the vendor's reserve.
Behind closed doors and after some negotiation on price, Natalie manages to secure her first home.
It's definitely been difficult and stressful trying to figure out whether we'll be able to afford the mortgage repayments if interest rates go up, but hopefully now that they've started to settle, we should be okay.
Prices rose nationally by 0.4% in January and 8.7% over the year. It marked the 12th straight month of gains driven by Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane. Darwin and Sydney rose marginally, while Melbourne, Canberra and Hobart went backwards.
Nationally, we're expecting house prices to rise in 2024, but probably at a slower rate than what we saw last year.
For those looking to break into the market, getting a home loan might be easier. The Reserve Bank is expected to keep rates on hold at its next meeting, but economists are tipping there might be rate cuts later this year.
$1,690,000. We expect moderate falls in property prices this year, averaging around 3 to 5%. Lower interest rates might provide a bit of support later this year, but the big risk to all of this on the downside is if unemployment rises significantly, and that could result in deeper falls in property prices.
For now, finding a dream home is still hard for most. Nassim Khadem, ABC News.
The Australian Institute of Sport's new universal guidelines on concussion recommends all children sit out sport for at least 21 days after a head knock. The advice for all grassroots and professional sports has been broadly welcomed, but concerns have been raised about educating the tens of thousands of volunteers who coach kids.
17-year-old Brianna Wong knows all about concussions.
I had symptoms for about a week and a bit, which was blurred vision. I had
like migraines. It was pretty bad.
Under new Institute of Sport guidelines, if she was concussed again, she'd have to sit out her sport for at least 3 weeks and be free of symptoms for 2 weeks before she could start contact training.
I think it's an amazing idea. With this now, you have a structure to follow and you know how long you're going to be out for. You know what the protocol is when it happens.
We're unashamed in having a real focus on youth and community sport because that's where there's an absence of healthcare practitioners. That's where 95% of concussions happen.
The AIS developed the guidelines with colleagues in Australia, New Zealand and the UK.
The best way to protect the health and well-being of athletes at the youth and community level is to have one set of guidelines that everybody follows so there's no confusion or disagreement.
But there are concerns players may not report their concussions.
If I report this, then it probably is going to mean that I'm 21 days out of playing. Then they may or may not be likely to report it.
Brianna's father, Terry, would have the job of explaining the guidelines to more than 100 coaches at his local club.
It does come down to education. I think most of our coaches and managers want to make sure that their players' welfare is at the forefront.
The AIS has also recommended professional athletes not return to contact sport until they've been free of concussion symptoms for at least 10 days. That would be a big extension on the current guidelines for the country's biggest football codes, rugby league and Australian rules. A spokesman for the Australian Rugby League Commission told the ABC it's reviewing the Institute of Sport's guidelines to see how they could apply to rugby league, while the AFL is also reviewing its current concussion guidelines ahead of the 2024 season. David Mark, ABC News.
For the first time in history, the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies has expanded its reach beyond Canberra, opening a new centre in Alice Springs. The new facility will allow locals to access more than 1 million items of Indigenous cultural significance, preserving culture and language for generations to come.
It's the largest collection of its kind in the world.
Over 700,000 photographic records, over 42,000 hours of audio material, over 6 million feet of film material, and a growing art and object collection at the moment in excess of 6,000 items.
Now accessible for the first time outside Canberra.
Community has a voice, the community has access, the community, the future can do research.
The Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, or IATSIS, today opening its first satellite office in the heart of Mbarntwa, Alice Springs.
Think about the symbolism in Alice Springs being geographically the centre of Australia, and thinking about the centrality of First Nations people and their history and culture to Australia as a nation.
The centre features an exhibition and engagement space, allowing Indigenous people to access cultural resources on country.
I think that is significant for us in Mbarntwa because to have this facility here for our future generations and us to do research on our history.
IATSIS will also work closely with local communities to preserve, digitise and store at-risk cultural material,
so that we don't lose any of our history, our language or our culture.
6 of the 7 staff at the new centre are Indigenous people from right here in Alice Springs, and they hope to continue building this local workforce for years to come. A new space to safeguard culture and language in the centre of Australia. Charmaine Allison, ABC News, Alice Springs.
Coming up on 7:30, Sarah Ferguson asked the UNICEF chief Catherine Russell about accusations employees at the UN Refugee Agency were involved in the October 7 attacks.
This is an unprecedented sort of allegation that's been made against these people. I think, obviously from our perspective, the last thing we want is anybody working for the United Nations who does anything, associated with terrorists and with organizations that are destructive to other people.
The UN's main agency providing aid for Palestinians is under pressure to restore confidence with its donors before its money runs out at the end of the month. At least 12 countries, including Australia, have temporarily suspended funding for UNRWA after Israeli allegations against some of its workers.
At one of only 3 entry points into Gaza.
And the police officers are pushing and shoving, and the protesters are doing the same.
Israeli protesters try to blockade trucks from entering. Hundreds have descended upon the Kerem Shalom border crossing for a week now, demanding no aid for Gaza until all hostages are released. In another blow for civilians in Gaza, the Israeli Prime Minister met with ambassadors to the UN, telling them the biggest UN aid provider to Palestinians must go.
UNRWA is totally infiltrated with Hamas.
The agency fired 9 workers and launched an investigation after Israel claimed they had participated in Hamas's October 7 attack.
UNRWA's life-saving services should not be jeopardized by the alleged actions of a few individuals.
The allegations prompted several countries, including Australia, to halt funds for UNRWA.
These are deeply concerning allegations, and we have made clear they need to be thoroughly investigated.
The UN agency is now in a race to persuade donors that they have responded inappropriately before money runs out at the end of this month. Time is everything. A new UNICEF report says supplies of nutritional food are virtually finished. Another confronting figure from UNICEF. An estimated 19,000 children in Gaza are now orphans or have no adult to care for them. This girl was delivered by C-section. Her mother was killed by an Israeli bomb before she could name her child.
We've lost connection with her relatives. Nobody came.
Born into a dreadful war and a bleak future. The girl with no name. John Lyons, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Some of the world's leading social media companies have been accused of having blood on their hands during a fiery hearing in the US Senate. 5 tech bosses were grilled over whether they're doing enough to protect children on their platforms.
The faces of the young and vulnerable held up as tech chiefs from 5 of the biggest social media companies took the oath.
This is my daughter, Olivia.
This is our son, Matthew.
Look at how beautiful Miriam is.
Republicans and Democrats want big tech to answer for the abuse and exploitation of children on their platforms.
I know you don't mean it to be so, but you have blood on your hands. You have a product. You have a product that's killing people.
37% of teenage girls between 13 and 15 were exposed to unwanted nudity in a week on Instagram. You knew about it. Who did you fire?
The boss of Facebook and Instagram, Mark Zuckerberg, came under the most scrutiny.
Would you like to apologize for what you've done to these good people?
No one should have to go through the things that your families have suffered.
Senator, we are devastated.
The head of Snapchat was also under fire.
There are a number of parents whose children have been able to access illegal drugs on your platform. What do you say to those parents?
We work very hard to block all search terms related to drugs from our platform.
The CEOs defended their business practices, including child safety features.
We make careful product design choices to help make our app inhospitable to those seeking to harm teens.
It is time for a federal standard to criminalize the sharing of non-consensual intimate material.
There is a proposed law to rein in tech companies and hold them accountable for what's shared on their platforms. In a Congress paralysed by partisan divides and political infighting, even agreement on this issue hasn't been enough to change the landscape yet. Carrington Clark, ABC News, Washington.
And if you or someone you know needs help, please contact Beyond Blue by phone or their website. Or if you're experiencing distress, please contact Lifeline on 131114. To finance now, and the local share market and the Australian dollar both fell today after the US Federal Reserve poured cold water on hopes of an early rate cut. Here's Alan Kohler.
America's interest rate setting committee met last night, and after the meeting it was a game of two halves. The statement came first, and in it the Fed went from talking about when rates might go up to when they might go down, which is called shifting from a tightening bias to an easing bias. And then Chairman Jerome Powell held a press conference and was asked, "What about March?" And he replied, "Nah, sorry, unlikely." The US dollar jumped at that point, and on the share market, shoulders and prices slumped. So the Aussie dollar fell and Australian share prices fell also for the first time in almost a fortnight. The banks that have been running hot had the biggest falls, while the lithium miners went down as well, as usual. But look, financial market punters might be gnashing what's left of their teeth, but this is good. The Federal Reserve has managed to get inflation under control without a recession and with barely an increase in unemployment at all. It's called immaculate disinflation. Markets and the Fed members themselves are forecasting much lower US interest rates, down from 5.25% to 3%. And that's good news for Aussie borrowers as well, because the Reserve Bank won't want to be a shag on a rock with a cash rate above 4% when that happens. And speaking of Aussie borrowers, as you've heard, the other side of the ledger, the asset side, is still rising, or at least the national median house price is, although it is getting patchy and the monthly growth rate is well into a decline, as you can see. And that's partly because the shortage is disappearing as the immigration comes down and housing completions rise a bit. And that's finance.
Australian all-rounders Mitch Marsh and Ash Gardner have won the country's highest honour in cricket. Gardner won the Belinda Clark Award for the second time in 3 years to cement herself as one of the world's best players. And Marsh has fought back tears when accepting the Alan Border Medal, as he thanked teammates and family for sticking with him through difficult times.
A popular winner who just became even more relatable.
I'm a bit fat at times and I love a beer, but I've had a few people come up and ask for photos this morning saying they're a bit fat too.
The throwaway line punctuated an emotional acceptance speech in which Mitch Marsh thanked coach and captain.
You believed in me.
And his wife, Greta.
I thought I was done and dusted, but I often spoke to my wife about that I just wanted to get one more crack at it, and it's been amazing.
A player who didn't make the most of his opportunities, Marsh once declared Australia hated him. But an Alan Border Medal win has capped off a great comeback tale after a season highlighted by an Ashes century and 200s at the World Cup.
To be back into the Test team now after a long time out, it's been an incredible 6 months.
And the winner of the Belinda Clark Award is Ashley Gardner.
For the second time in her decorated career, Ash Gardner won cricket's highest honour. An all-rounder, Gardner's bowling shone in particular as she took more wickets than any of her teammates.
I think my bowling has probably evolved a lot quicker than kind of what I was thinking.
He's not thinking about awards just yet, but Xavier Bartlett could make his national debut against the West Indies in tomorrow's opening one-day international match at the MCG.
I mean, it's just amazing to be here and the opportunity to rub shoulders with these sort of guys. Yeah, still definitely pinching myself for that.
Fellow paceman Lance Morris is also in line to debut as Australia fields a relatively inexperienced side. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
The Richmond and Essendon Dreamtime match is one of the biggest fixtures in Australian rules football. Now, league administrators are locked in discussions with the clubs to move the Dreamtime game in the women's competition to the epicentre of Indigenous footy, the Northern Territory.
It's one of the great spectacles of the national game, a celebration of Aboriginal culture. A match between two powerhouse clubs bearing the colours of the Aboriginal flag and the centrepiece of the AFL's Indigenous round.
Dreamtime games to honour Aboriginal people of Australia. It's quite simple.
When COVID closed off attendances in 2020, the game moved to the Northern Territory, uniting Dreamtime with the heartland of Indigenous football.
Magnificent! I want to welcome the Burin Patha people. I want to welcome the Walpuri and the Wurrumungu people. I want to welcome the Aranda people, because we're all countrymen.
More recently, AFLW players got their first crack at Dreamtime footy, delighting fans with classic matches in 2022 and 2023. After the resounding success of these games, the AFL is deep in discussions to move the women's game permanently to the top end.
Well, in 2020, you saw the eyes of the nation on Darwin when we did the men's Dreamtime game, and it was just a sensational spectacle. The women's Dreamtime game will be just as sensational.
It has to get the sign-off from league headquarters and the clubs first, But AFL Northern Territory is confident the game could move here as soon as the upcoming season and develop into a major showcase.
It'll be a Dreamtime game, and hopefully it'll develop into a Dreamtime round where not just Richmond and Essendon but the other clubs will come and they'll participate in a magnificent round of women's football in the Northern Territory.
Both Richmond and Essendon have confirmed to the ABC that they are in discussions to bring the AFLW Dreamtime match to Darwin. Recognising the Indigenous roots that run through the game, it's a prospect that players are getting right behind.
The ties to obviously the Marngrook game and where AFL and where football started, I think you'd be crazy not to tap into those ties, and I think being able to actually have a Dreamtime game over in Darwin would be incredible.
A long-standing dream for many Territorians that could soon become a reality. Steve Vivian, ABC News.
Wonderful. Now to a story about an inquisitive toddler who got stuck in a shopping centre toy machine. It took officers from a tactical crime squad to get him out.
It was a case of claw and order after mischievous 3-year-old Ethan Hopper climbed into this toy machine dispenser in Brisbane's south.
Glass? Perfect. Glass.
It took him seconds to get in after evading his parents.
If he goes to that back corner, you could tap it, but this one here, yeah.
Used to arresting hardened criminals, the quick-thinking officers came up with the perfect tactical response.
Are you able to get him to that back corner? Hey, Ethan, go to that back corner. Go to that corner over there. Go to mum.
To his delight, it was all part of the game.
Now, Ethan, cover your eyes, hide.
He's peeking. Then, with the swing of a hammer, he was freed.
Come here, buddy. There you go.
The inquisitive tot later fronted the media with his relieved parents.
Well, it's quite funny. I messaged my old man and he asked me how many $2 coins do I have. We can try and win them back.
He was stuck for 10 minutes yelling out free toys to his bemused parents.
He was having the time of his life.
As for when the call came in...
And this is the first in 11 years of policing. I wasn't expecting this one to come up.
Ethan finally got a cuddly toy as his prize.
That's all right.
Then it was high fives and a big hug. A cheeky toddler with a cheeky tale to tell. Lexi Hamilton-Smith, ABC News.
And now it's time for the weather, and tonight's weather pick at the Barclay Homestead has been sent in by Professor Michael Sankey. Cloud about the territory with some isolated showers and thunderstorms in the north, hot and dry in the south. 32 degrees for Darwin today, 33 in Warramayunga. In the rest of the territory, 34 today in Katherine and in Nhulunbuy, and Jabiru 35. 38 degrees for Alice Springs and Yalara, and it was 39 for Tennant Creek. On the satellite, mostly clear skies across the country. There is some dense cloud around the Gulf of Carpentaria. Ex-tropical cyclone Kirrily is moving slowly towards northwest Queensland, and a ridge stretches across central and southern Australia. Interstate tomorrow, 18 degrees in Hobart, Melbourne 21 degrees, warmer in Canberra 32, Sydney 28, a sunny 33 for Brisbane, and a hot one in Perth 37 degrees tomorrow. Back in the territory tomorrow, Alice Springs headed for 39 degrees, Tennant Creek and Elliot reaching 40. In the north, 37 in Katherine, 38 in Daly Waters, a top of 39 in Borroloola. To the west, 34 in Batchelor and partly cloudy and a top of 33 in Darwin tomorrow. A flood watch warning remains in place for parts of the NT, with areas also seeing minor flooding. Possible rain could impact the Settlement Creek, Nicholson River, Georgina River and Eyre Creek catchments. The evening high tide will be at 3:20, and there's a marine wind warning tomorrow for the Arafura Coast, Go Peninsula Coast and Roper Groot Coast. The sun will rise tomorrow at 6:40 and set at 7:20. Ahead in Darwin, possible showers and a storm over the weekend, partly cloudy conditions likely lingering as well. To Alice Springs, temperatures staying around 40 degrees, though it could drop by the middle of next week. Some cloud expected to hang around from the weekend. And we'll have an extended edition of ABC's Northern Territory news tomorrow night with the first of our monthly State Line features. Join us for an exclusive interview with new Chief Minister Eva Lawler, examining the challenges and priorities for Labor ahead of this year's election. Stay with us now. Sarah Ferguson is up next with 7:30. Good night.